Good afternoon, everyone. This is Gretchen Wall, coordinator of the Produce Safety Alliance. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I still see quite a few people joining online. Just a note, if you are joined just by phone, unfortunately, I won't be able to unmute you for questions. So if you do have access to a computer, I do recommend you joining the Zoom meeting room in order to be able to ask questions and be part of the Q&A during this session. But we have a special produce safety educators call planned, and for those of you who haven't been a part of our calls before, we typically host these on a monthly basis, although when the production season gets going, we tend to do fewer meetings, but generally this group is to inform and provide information about educational materials, outreach efforts, training efforts, updates from FDA and USDA, generally anything that's relatable to produce safety and the Food Safety Modernization Act. We try to get that material across to an audience of generally trainers and educators like yourselves. So this is an open group, and if you are joining us for the first time and you received this information from somebody else, i.e. you were forwarded an email that contained the link to this webinar, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to add you to this listserv because we do host these meetings monthly. But on today's call, what we thought we would do was actually try to highlight some of the educational materials that are out there currently or being currently developed, both from the regional centers and from the cooperative agreements that have been awarded by FDA and USDA. So this is going to be a longer meeting. We have it scheduled for an hour and a half. And basically, the agenda is going to be each of the regional centers and cooperative agreements providing an update on what kind of educational materials are currently available and what is currently in development, just so that we're all in the know about what's out there so we don't reinvent the wheel. And I know there are a lot of smaller grant projects that have been awarded, and folks are starting to discuss what kind of materials still might need to be developed. So hopefully this is useful to you all. But this meeting, as you are aware, this is on Zoom, and we have not previously used Zoom for these meetings before. So I apologize in advance for any technical issues because we're still learning the system too. Previously we have used WebEx, but generally the call, all the participants are going to be muted. And we will be pausing during the midpoint of the session and then at the end of the meeting so that folks can ask questions related to the presentations. But because we're trying to fit in so much information into this particular call, we're going to hold questions to those particular periods. In order to ask a question, again, you have to be logged into the online platform, and you can raise your hand in order to ask questions. If you aren't able to get your question answered during the session because we get a lot of questions, feel free to email myself or Betsy or any one of the PSA team, and we will absolutely follow up after the call. If you can see on your screen, we are recording this meeting, so if you need to hop off or if you join late, it is being recorded, and the notes and the recording will be shared both via the listserv and on our website. There's actually a tab for all of the meeting notes for this Produce Safety Educators group on our website. So it'll all be put up there in the next few days. So you can see we have a really packed agenda. And what we'd like to do is have each one of the regional centers present their current educational materials and things that are currently in development as well. So we'll be going through each one of those. They'll have 10 minutes to give you those highlights. And then, of course, we will send out some notes after we're all done. But to kick it off, if you are familiar with the Produce Safety Alliance's work in the past 6 or 7 years, we have followed this, basically a funnel of development for our curriculum and for our educational materials. And we really, at the beginning of our process in developing the standardized curriculum, we tried to cast a wide net, and that included hosting 10 working committees, hosting an educational materials conference, really seeing what was out there and identifying the gaps, challenges. From there, we went on to set goals for the curriculum, and that included some farmer focus groups to really hone in on what kind of training the produce farmers preferred most. And then we went on to develop learning objectives and actually create the content, which was wrapped up last July of 2016. So as you're probably aware, the PSA has two primary curricula, and they are both now available in English and Spanish. We just also posted both of those curriculums online for download. We also have them available at the bookstore in the print format as we have before. So we have both the grower training course and the train the trainer course. And then there are some supporting materials that go along with the actual manuals. And those include, we have a regulatory table, which is basically the verbatim language from the produce safety rule, just in an easier to read and easier to navigate format. We have a whole list of food safety plan writing resources, and those are also cataloged on our website. We've developed learning objectives and critical concepts for each of the individual modules within the curriculum. And then there's a lot of supporting resources, not just from FDA on Fisma, but also from programs related to USDA AMS, such as GAP and Group GAP programs, and USDA NRCS, which most of those resources have to do with co-management. So those are also included in our manual. And then we have a full-on glossary to highlight any terms that growers or trainers might be unfamiliar with. So those, that particular curriculum, the grower training course, is one way to satisfy the produce safety rule requirement outlined in 112.22c. So that's just our basic curriculum materials. We also wanted to make everyone aware of some of the supplemental resources that we already have available and which have already been developed. And I put the website right at the top. It's under our resources tab under the general resource listing. And we have a bunch of different fact sheets related to agricultural water, not just to talk about, what is a geometric mean, what is a statistical threshold value, what are these microbial die-off rates, but also the water analysis method within the produce safety rule, and then just some general insights and guidance for growers on where they should be starting with regards to the water requirements. We also have a really great resource that is related to record keeping, and that document are all of the records that are required by the Fisma produce safety rule, and that also includes actual templates that the growers could fill out to satisfy those record keeping requirements. One of our most biggest resources, I guess, and most complete is actually one of the resources related to sanitation, and that's a sanitizers for produce, and it's an Excel tool. And Donna Paul, who led that project, went and scoured all of the different products that growers are using for washing or cooling produce or for direct contact with fruits and vegetables. And it is pretty extraordinary. It includes all of the labeling information, whether it's organic approved, the EPA label. There's a lot of information there, and there's actually a video tutorial that goes with that as well. We also have some trainer-specific resources, and those are on the same subpage, but they're under trainer resources. There's a lot of resources related to, the actual course logistics, how you register a course, the agenda for the Produce Safety Alliance courses, template language for advertising if you're gonna put out an advertisement for a course, and then how to order materials. Some other specific trainer resources would be, we have a PowerPoint that we developed for produce safety rule exemptions and exclusions, and that PowerPoint actually includes some scenarios. I'm a farm or a packing house and I'm growing X amount of produce, selling to this market. Am I exempt or am I in the rule? And it goes through a bunch of different scenarios. And we've gotten feedback that that's a great tool to use with audiences that aren't really sure where they fall. And then we have a just for fun resource, Produce Safety Bingo, just something to keep growers engaged throughout the course that has a lot of the produce safety rule terminology to get them more familiar with those resources. Things that we have in progress. We have a long list of things that we would like to work on, but right now, currently, we are working on a sanitation related resource. It's called Name That Zone, and it basically includes some photos to help growers prioritize and identify different zones within produce packing houses so that they can prioritize their cleaning and sanitation. And It includes pictures and then some narrative for the trainer to guide that activity. And one of our biggest projects right now is actually taking the PSA grower training course and transitioning that into an online course that will still meet the same requirements that are outlined in 112.22c. And that course will be very similar to the National GAPS program, the produce safety course that currently exists at Cornell, but it will be instructor-led. It will include activities and opportunities for engagement, and it will incorporate all of the same materials that are included in the training that would be delivered in person to the growers, including all the produce safety rule requirements. We are currently developing all of those online modules, and we're anticipating that we will launch those modules in the winter of 2018. Looking forward into what kind of educational materials we might want to develop or potential collaboration ideas, we're always looking for ways that we can modify currently existing materials or even develop new materials in response to technical assistance requests. So we get a lot of questions about post-harvest sanitation, especially sanitary design, because that seems to be a relatively new concept in the produce safety world. Things related to small and very small farm and food safety solutions, resources for produce buyers, and even incorporating some of that new science, the science that comes out through the Center for Produce Safety or other research to incorporate into our educational materials. We are also looking to add or adapt materials for specific audiences. We have worked to adapt some of these materials for Amish and Mennonite growers, for small, for organic growers. We want to make sure our materials are culturally appropriate. So if you have a specific audience that you're working with and we have a resource that you think is really great but needs to be tweaked a little, we'd be happy to work with you on that. And then lastly, we've been working recently on our international training efforts. We are part of the Produce International Partnership, and that is working with the Joint Institute for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition and also FDA. And we're trying to identify training needs and additional educational materials that might be appropriate for international audiences. So that's a quick rundown of all of our materials. I want to pause and ask Betsy if I happen to miss anything in our rundown for our materials.
Nope, all looks good. I think in the name of keeping on track, we should move to the next group.
Okay. Well, our next group is the Northeast Center to Advance Food Safety, and we have Elizabeth Newbold on the phone. She's the center administrator for University of Vermont Extension, and she's going to go through what they've got cooking up.
Great. Can you hear me, Gretchen?
I can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I just wanted to thank Gretchen for the opportunity to do this. I will say right away that the Northeast Center is not itself creating any new additional add-on materials. And so what we did in order to prepare for this webinar was I sent out a call to everybody in the Northeast region to ask educators and folks who do training on the ground if they have created any additional add-on educational material that to let us know about it, because we don't know, and we are interested in getting all this information anyway, since there is a group of educators in the Northeast who are looking to start working on some new material. So what I'm going to actually present on today is work that's being done by folks in the Northeast region, not in connection with NECAFs, but rather on their own, perhaps as part of a grant or just as part of work that they have done over the years as they've seen needs arise in the training program. So I don't think that this is an exhaustive list necessarily, but rather it is reflective of those who responded to us. So there may be things out there that I'm not aware of, but I will highlight what was responded to us, and I thank those who took the time to provide us with this information. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is work done by Rita, Brennan, Olsen at the Massachusetts Partnership for Food Safety Education. And that work is food safety for food workers, basic food safety instructional materials. And what they created are free downloadable instructional materials that are simple, easy to read, posters, pamphlets, and other print materials on basic food safety principles that are available online in multiple languages. It's, for example, their food safety equipment and safety training videos, instructional materials emphasize basic cleaning and sanitizing of food equipment. So this has a lot to do with kitchens and places where people are actually cleaning and sanitizing food equipment. And that has been completed. This is something that's you could use as a supplement to a training, or just if someone's looking for some pamphlets or posters or material to be provided individually. And I've provided the websites here at the bottom where that information is available. And you can go to the next slide. And the next one was provided by Molly Della Roman, this is, I know, a food safety outreach program grant in our region through New Entry Sustainable Farming Project. And they've got a lot going on that's currently in development as they work through their grant. They are doing a food safety training, food safety checklist, produce safety rule, plain language guide, and food safety presentation. And what they're doing, again, it's free downloadable instructional materials, simple, easy to read. These will be posted on their website, which is listed here. And one thing is that they are currently in development, as I mentioned, and eager to get feedback from folks as they develop these things. They are working in collaboration with Lisa McKeague at the University of Massachusetts and Billy Mitchell at Global Growers, who have been looking at this information. It focuses on farms that are exempt, small growers, which is their primary audience that they work with. And they are looking to receive some feedback from folks. And so if you are interested in doing that and reviewing or helping to provide feedback to them, you could reach out to Molly. Her email address is listed here at the top. And again, if you wanted to collaborate on any of that or provide feedback, she is looking for some additional feedback. I can go to the next one. Okay, the next is titled Wash Your Produce. This is developed by Shauna Henley at the University of Maryland Extension, Baltimore County. And she worked in collaboration with the Maryland Department of Agriculture and Deanna Baldwin there. This has been a completed project, and it is a signage showing how to wash fresh produce, as well as the hows and whys that consumers wash produce. So this is something that is not currently online, but if you want the PDF or PowerPoints, you can email Shauna and she would be happy to share that information with you. And this is something that would be supplemental material that would go with trainings, or again, could be handed out individually as people were requesting information from you. Next. So the next one is from Heather Bryant at the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, and the title of it is Water Calculators. And this is a PowerPoint presentation that Heather put together to include as part of the PSA training or grower training. And what it is it's a PowerPoint that presentation that uses snapshots that show the audience microbial water quality profile calculators that are available online for free. And some of the examples that she does use is from the Western Center for Food Safety and Alabama Cooperative Extension. So as they're giving that module, she includes this PowerPoint to help growers know where they can go to get information on figuring out water quality profiles. Next. Then the last one is produce safety best practices from field to consumer. And this is created by Kyla Bedard at NOFA, Vermont. And she worked with Hans Estrin, who's part of the University of Vermont Extension. And this is a workshop that's currently in development. It's an on-farm workshop. It's a standalone program, and it's a tour that travels through the farm focused on produce safety planning for small and medium-sized farms. They tour through a farm's CAPS, which is Community Accreditation for Produce Safety Plan, and SOP from field to packing area. So CAPS is a Vermont state accreditation program, but the idea is to focus on small and medium-sized farms and show them what it looks like for a farm to have successfully gone through that accreditation program and showing of the SOPs and their accreditation paperwork. And as I mentioned, that's currently in development, although the first workshop is going to be held on August 7th. And there's more information on the NOFA Vermont website. So those who are interested could attend to get more, or follow up after that program to see how that went and more information on what that individual program looks like. And then the next. And finally, what NECAPS is doing is we're creating a regional clearinghouse that will be a culmination point for all of the resources in the food safety world across the region. And it will include supplemental and add-on educational material. And so once this is up and launched, which it will be by the end of the month, the website is listed there. I'm sorry, I said the end of the month, but I'm end of the summer. And this will be a place where people can go and upload the information that they have created. So there's a one-stop for folks to go and find resources that they might be looking for. And the other thing that it will serve as is that once populated, it will help us understand what material exists and where there are needs for additional educational material, which will help us to inform further development of educational materials. And I welcome all of you who are on this call, once it's launched, to go in and create a username and password and upload your links and information so that folks who are visiting our website can search and find the additional educational material that you have created. So that's it for me, and thanks so much.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. We're gonna hold off on questions until after the next two presentations, and then we'll stop and we'll have a question and answer session. But what I'd like to do is move on to the Southern Center for Fisma Training and their add-on materials. And Jessica Lepper has agreed to present today. Michelle Danilick and Travis and the rest of the University of Florida team were all tied up in other trainings today. So we really appreciate you, Jessica, for coming and joining us today.
Great, thank you so much, Gretchen. Can you guys hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Okay, wonderful. I wanted to thank you again, Gretchen, for allowing me this opportunity to be able to present today. As you have already mentioned, Keith, Travis, Renee, and Michelle were priorly engaged in other commitments leading other respective FSMA workshops. So I just wanted to ask if everyone can please excuse them today, but I am happy to be able to present our Southern Center for FSMA Training add-on educational materials that we've had progressed so far. If you'd please advance to the next slide. And this is the focus here for our Southern Center, is that we consist of 13 states, in addition to Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. We've taken a consortium approach with 17 partners, plus the University of Florida, each with their own subcontract. And our partners include 15 land-grant universities, including the University of Florida, and 3 non-government organizations. And so hopefully, if you are part of one of these universities, you're not hearing this info for the first time today. All right, next slide, please. We're just briefly going to go over our Southern Center project objectives, and our main focus here are on those even objectives that we have bolded, but we have developed a cadre of PSA and FSPCA certified trainers within our region who are focused on supporting our produce industry. And we've also created strong partnerships with representative non-governmental organizations as well as community-based organizations to build capacity and to strengthen our collaboration with our FSMA compliant trainings. But again, we're heavily focused on developing and delivering region and stakeholder specific education, training curricula, as well as technical assistance programs. And we've also highly focused on what is our impact that the Southern Center has and how we can evaluate our education, training, and technical assistance programs. Next slide, please. So this is just a snapshot of the Southern Center here, or another way to look at the Southern Center. We've produced a cadre of certified trainers, lead trainers, and lead instructors from our Train the Trainer workshops and our supplemental Fisma curricula. And all these trainers are then training our stakeholders, and this is all done through efforts of coordination, communication, technical assistance, as well as evaluation to determine our impact. Next slide, please. So to go into a little bit more detail in our objective 2 terms that we are using, our brief snapshots are in add-ons and our teaching examples that we now refer to as, where we used to refer to them as modules. And what we are trying to focus on is not creating an alternate curricula. What we want to do for our add-ons is we have developed and are progressing our workshops, materials, and our specific products that will enhance understanding among our stakeholders regarding the standardized curricula. And one example of that would be our water workshop, where we have how to test and how to interpret those results, as well as collecting information on a list of water testing labs that would actually test for the current recognized method, EPA 1603. And we also have our teaching examples that we are very proud of, and I will cover more detail on a further slide, but these are especially for FSPCA trainings, and they're highly relevant for those, but they can still be relative to produce safety workshops. But these are unofficial examples that can be used for our breakout exercises for the FSPCA courses with specific examples, and we have one that would be similarly relative for our produce safety information would be our tomato packing house example, where we have created a food safety plan. All right, next slide, please. So the development of the add-ons in our Southern Center, this is just a quick timeline of where we are in the developmental process. And we're getting close to what we hope will be a rollout in January 18. So we had brainstorming about what region-specific supplements to our core curricula are necessary. We discussed groupers versus splitters and what would be our specific target audience, as well as how can we present this information so that it would be well received by that audience, and to develop our learning objectives. And then in our second year, we had discussed our updates, what was our further development, and how to progress in the future. And again, we are hoping that our rollout will be in January 2018, and it seems so far that everything is moving on track. All right, next slide. So our add-ons in the Southern Center consists of the 9 that are listed here, with 5 under the produce safety rule and 4 under the preventive controls rules. For biohazards, just an example of their objectives would be to identify microbial hazards for fresh produce commodities during growing, harvesting, packing, and or holding activities. And we're not only using resources from the produce safety modules in the manual that we have, but also external sources of information for the identification of produce commodity-specific contaminating pathogens. So I just want to go into a little bit more detail in our second produce safety rule add-on here in our next slide. And this is our produce safety rule exemptions team that we have consisted here. Right, next slide, please. And for our exemption brainstorming, we discussed how to help our growers decide what is their specific coverage or any exemptions that do exist, and what rules would they fall under, if any, and also how would they be able to prove such an exemption exists. And the discussion of the format was decided on a Q&A guide. Next slide. The specific learning objectives for our produce safety rule exemptions are to define a farm and all the types of the farm, the primary, the secondary, and farm mix type facilities, and identify activities allowed during harvesting, packing, holding, storing, and distributing of produce, to determine whether an operation may qualify as a retail food establishment, to list produce that is covered and not covered under the produce safety rule, to identify farms that are exempt from PSR, and to define a qualified exemption and identify farms that qualify for that specific exemption, to identify records or documents to verify and retain exempt or qualified exempt status, and to explain the key cornerstones, which are basic standards of the produce safety rule, and finally to list compliance dates for the produce safety rule. Next slide. So what we're looking at here in the future is that we have a document that's approximately consisted of 18 pages, and there was some discussion of there to be an app development. However, we might have to reallocate resources for this to become a reality. So in the next steps, we're nearing the review phase and hopefully seeing that to be coming out early next year. All right, next slide, please. So here we have commodity-specific teaching examples. We have 25 in total that are being developed and that are focused on a number of processes and commodities specific to the South. So this is an animation slide, so if you could just advance. And we can see here that we have 2 of these plans that served as the United Fresh Working Group. And we are pleased to announce that as of the end of June 2017, these 2 plans have been included in the FSPCA instructor portal for wide distribution. This process was not fast, and it was taken well over a year, but now that we know the process and the specific changes FDA made, we are updating the additional plans for their inclusion in the portal as well. And an important example of a change FDA made was the distinction that the packing houses do not fall under the definition of a receiving facility, and as such are not required by FDA to have a supply chain program. However, we do still recommend to our stakeholders that they include a supply chain program. All right, next slide, please. So finally, our last objective here was determining our impact through evaluation, and we have the 4 tools listed here. We are discussing logic models for FSPCA and PSA trainings, an attendance questionnaire as well. And what we're mostly proud of here is our pre and post tests to show that our impact for FSPCA and PSA trainings. We believe this is the strength of what we have developed. And it does show here that our post-test scores were statistically significantly higher than our pre-test scores. We are showing that there's significant increase in knowledge after participation in our PSA training. So we're very excited about that. And yes, of course, we're willing to share this information who anyone is interested in. However, you may use our test, but you will have to manage your own data, and our IRB does not cover your publishing and any data you generate from those tests. And then finally, our last tool is our 3-month follow-up interviews. So with that, I know we are going to wait until our next presenter to have questions. So I'll go ahead and disregard the next slide and hand it over to our next presenter.
Thank you so much, Jessica. That was a great overview. I know you guys have a lot of materials in the works, so that's a great highlight for everybody to see. But as Jessica mentioned, I'd like to go on to the North Central region and turn it over to Dr. Angela Shaw, who's the project director at that center, and she can review what's going on with North Central, and then we will stop and take a quick question and answer break.
Well, thank you, Gretchen. Hopefully everybody can hear me. Next slide, please. So the North Central region, we go from basically the Dakotas all the way over to Ohio. And this is a snapshot of what our website looks like, ncrfisma.org. Next slide, please. So once again, we represent the 12 states within the Midwest region of the United States: Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Minnesota, Michigan, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, Ohio, and Wisconsin. Next slide, please. We have 4 main objectives for our center, and I'm going to go through our accomplishments in this order. So the first one was to develop a sustainable communication network between educators and growers within the North Central region. and help build training capacity. The second big one that we've completed is we did a regional needs assessment and to identify what the gaps in knowledge were specifically for the produce safety rule. Next slide, please. Our third objective was to do our add-on, so development of food safety programs that address our regional needs based on our needs assessments that we have for our growers and our processors. With our fourth objective being that we're going to continue to evaluate and improve on all of the add-ons that we are creating. Next slide. So what has been done thus far? Next slide. So under the increasing of the network, we've established our public website that we just showed, the NCR Fisma, and we have our partnerships with all 12 states, land grant institutions within our region, and we've developed a database that reaches over 2,000 growers within our region. And I mention this because this is a resource for you. So if you have educational material that you would like to get out to growers in our region, we have this database that we can share information related to produce safety. We also have bi-monthly meetings for all of our stakeholder groups to be able to know more. We have a public newsletter, and you can go onto our website, ncrfisma.org, that gives you a monthly update on all the things that are happening in our region. As well as we host listening sessions every month to hear from growers and processors of what's going on. Now we have 2 journal articles that have been submitted. One that goes to the Journal of Extension that talks about our needs assessment tool. And the second one that we're developing with the results of our needs assessment. We had a lot of data, and we hope to be able to publish that in Food Protection Trends. Next slide, please. So what about this needs assessment? Well, our center really wanted to get at the growers and ask them what specific content of the produce rule weren't they going to have, what did they not get? What is a preferred delivery method, as well as we want to get a better handle on the demographics of what growers look like in our region. And we had over 600 usable surveys for a 2-round system that we utilize for our add-on development. Next slide, please. We are now focused on our processors needs assessment. We developed that in June, and we're currently under review for our needs assessment for going to the processor side of things, as well as looking at educational materials we can develop for that. On our website right now, you can get our audit checklist for processors of fruits and vegetables, and it's based on the Preventive Controls Human Food Rule. And we presented this work at Food Protection, or IFP, International Food Protection, this past summer. Next slide, please. Part of our next objective was to really increase the knowledge and capacity for our educators. So we have a lot of extension people in our region, and they really wanted to have support for providing training for growers. As we know, the climate is, there's not funds available. So we have developed a survey within our region to look at educators and identify how we can assess them or assist them in being better prepared for grower trainings. So we're looking at teaming up and partnering people together so that when they're going out to give grower trainings, the PSA training, there'll be at least 3 to 4 people in the room. Thus far for PSA courses, we've held 4 train the trainers in our region and 39 grower trainings, and we have 25 lead trainers and 139 trainers within the North Central region. Next slide. We've also been looking at how to evaluate our programs, and we have a post-training survey that we have for the food safety preventive controls courses, as well as we are using our electronic follow-up system to be able to go back to fruit and vegetable processors after the course and do some follow-up work with them. We've developed some survey tools for when people are doing field days and workshops to gather some of that knowledge and confidence related to that. As well as we do interviews of all of our state leads, which means within each of our states, we have a lead person. And if you're curious about who your lead person is, you can go to our website, and under About, you can find all the names addresses and phone numbers to the leads of all the states. Next slide, please. Lastly, what we've been doing is we've been trying to disseminate a lot of the information we've been developing. Our team has been traveling between states and between the regional centers to gather as much information, and we've been able to package that, and we do a lot of work on our Facebook page. So like us on Facebook, our North Central Regional Center, and you can see all the latest things that all of our partners are doing throughout the region. Next slide. Also, we're developing these add-on materials in the near future based on our needs assessment that we've created. So I'll get into a little bit more detail about those next. Next slide. So our timeline for our development of these add-on materials are, our groups are currently meeting, and by the end of October, we should have final drafts that will go through a courtesy review by FDA, and we'll have a final review for all of our add-on materials by January of 2018. So what are these add-on materials? Next slide, please. So we've identified 15 different topics that we are going to handle. The first one is on-farm training. So at the beginning of every day on a farm, you have those first 10 to 15 minutes where you provide instruction. We're looking at how can we create 1 to 2 minute training opportunities for farm managers to give to their workers. We're also looking at special provisions for people that are doing UPICs and farm stands, but also required to be in Fisma compliance. We are looking at supplemental information for biological soil elements for animal origin, wildlife management, domesticated animal management. We also are going to be developing information on bodily fluid cleanup, record keeping, and some of the differences between organic versus the produce safety rule. Next slide. We are also looking at, within our region, looking at Hmong and the Plainsman education, as well as the value-added industries, things like wine and hops, freezing and dehydration, jams and jellies, pickles and relish, and how all of these correspond to the produce safety rule as well as the preventive control rule as well. Next slide. So we have a lot of plans going forward. We are doing a lot of train the trainers. We have 2 upcoming in our region, as well as we're looking at doing more grower trainings throughout our region and looking for additional opportunities to get more lead trainers and growers throughout our region. Next slide. This is my information, Angela Shaw. You can also find us at ncrfisma at iastate.edu or check us out on our website, NCR Fisma, to get on our public newsletter that comes out at the beginning of every month that gives you all the latest things that are happening in our region. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Angela, for that overview. I think what we're going to do now is actually pause for questions. So if you have any questions about the Produce Safety Alliance materials, about the Northeast Center, the Southern Center, and the North Central Region materials, this is your opportunity. And then after the question answer, we'll move on to the Western Center and the 2 cooperative agreements. So on your screen as an attendee, you should be able to see a little hand raise button. So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I can unmute you, or feel free to use the chat box. You can send those messages either to Betsy, Betsy Bin, or I, and we can respond to those questions.
Yep. I've been looking at some of the questions and trying to respond to them as they've been coming in, but there's only been a couple.
Everyone's minds are just blown at the amount of work that's going on right now, Betsy, I think.
That might be the case, actually. It's quite intense to sit here and listen to all of it.
Yeah, and just so you all know, we will be posting these slides so that you have all of those links available to you after this call, because I know there was a lot of information in the last few presentations.
Here's one. Are people continuing to do GAPS trainings, or are people moving only to PSA trainings? I'll take a stab at that using New York as an example. I think in New York we are doing both. what extension educators are trying to figure out is, what do the audiences need? So for growers that are new, especially growers that are likely not to be subject to Fisma, and I think many extension educators feel like going with basic gaps is a good way to get them introduced to it without hitting the PSA training full on. I see it as an evolution. So people are doing gaps, getting people oriented, and then moving to the Fisma, which includes the PSA training. So that's what the experience is in New York. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in on that or not.
I would say in the North Central region, our extension educators are doing the same thing, trying to assess where they're at, and doing supplemental courses in preparation for the PSA training, and developing workshops and add-ons to kind of support bringing the knowledge up before they hit the first course.
And to that end, to Angela's point about the preparation, I also think that the PSA is not the end-all be-all, and that there's trainings that are happening after that as well. So I look at it as a continuum. Any other comments about that?
I don't have any other questions, just a comment that it's great to hear all this activity and educational materials and development. So I would agree with that comment.
Mm-hmm. Somebody else asked about questions we had already gotten. One of the questions we got was in regard to the online course launch, and that's looking, we're trying to get that out by January of 2018, but we're also working on a version 2 of the curriculum. And as you guys know, FDA has announced that they might be making changes to the water provisions as well as timelines. So we're sort of, that may change the delivery depending on when all that stuff hits.
I did see one additional question, Betsy, come through just now. Is there a comparison chart between GAPS and Fisma? For example, if a farm is GAP certified, will they be able to see some next steps to become Fisma certified?
So a couple of things to that end. A lot of the audit, well, not a lot. USDA Harmonized has announced that they're going to try and update their audit to match the requirements in the rule. So some audit companies are doing that. In addition, there's the On-Farm Readiness Review, if you haven't heard about that, through the National Association of State Departments of Ag. So that'll be something that after growers have gone through a PSA training, they could engage in the On-Farm Readiness Review, and that will help them gauge if they're actually ready for an inspection. So I haven't seen a side-by-side chart, which is what the person asked about, but I do think there will be many options for growers to sort of say, am I in compliance with the rule as things move forward? There's a question about the online course. Will it be equal in the eyes of FDA to a class? We're certainly working with that, and that also might be part of that process. Development process.
And Betsy, I will add too that folks who are interested in learning more about the On-Farm Readiness Review, NECAFS is holding a webinar on Monday the 31st at 11. That is a complete overview of the On-Farm Readiness Review. And if you want to get more information on that, you can just go to our website and the login information, everything is there.
That's a good one. Thank you, Elizabeth. I was just actually looking at that. Okay.
With that, we have 3 more presentations that we'd like to get to. So what I'd like to do now is turn it over to the Western Regional Center, and Giovanna, who is the coordinator of the Western Center, is going to present about what they have going on.
Thank you, Gretchen. I hope you can hear me well.
I can hear you fine.
Great. So I'll jump into, give you a little brief overview of what areas are included in the Western Regional Center. So we include 13 Western states and 2 Pacific Island nations, and we are divided into 4 subregions: Pacific, Northwest, Southwest, and Mountain subregion. Similar to the Southern Center, our objectives include developing cadre of Produce Safety Alliance and Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance certified trainers within the U.S. Western region. Our second objective is to develop and deliver region and stakeholder-specific education, training, and technical assistance programs. And the third one is to evaluate the impacts of the education, training, and technical assistance programs. And the add-on projects fit into our objective too. So at our annual meeting in March 2017 in Honolulu, we had the first brainstorming for add-on curriculum development, and we divided it over the 2 days into produce safety, focus, and preventive controls. We had 52 people participate. Next slide, please. Out of that first brainstorming session, several projects were prioritized, 8 on the produce side, 5 in the preventive controls, and also 4 food safety model plans. In order to narrow that down, we gave our meeting attendees and members a month to regroup and connect, and then we asked them to submit a more detailed proposal for add-ons. And these were due by May 31st. They were reviewed in June, and we are just waiting, finalizing some budget details this week, and we're hoping to let the leads know that proposals that were accepted will go ahead. This will go out, notifications will go out on Friday this week. So next, please. We received 8 proposals. Next, please. And I will give you a brief overview of each of the proposals. So starting with the first one, these, I just like to mention that they do include both produce safety and preventive controls. So I'm not going to spend too much time in detail on the preventive controls, but you will have this in our slides. Next, please. So the objective of the first one is to develop educational training materials for hands-on workshop destined to provide the essentials for cleaning and sanitation, food handling, processing, and manufacturing facilities. And this includes some of the basics on the environmental monitoring as well as sanitation. Next, please. The start date for this project is August, and the anticipated end date is July of next year. The formats that will come out of this project will be written materials, electronic materials, as well as some of the activities developed. Next, please. The second part second project is on the flowchart for on-farm value-added processing. Next, please. The objective is to develop a series of flowcharts that will aid the farmers in determining what state and federal regulations apply to their operation. This is being done out of group in California is working on these. These flowcharts will be distinct from those already available from the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition in a way that they will include additional state regulations that may apply to value-added products. The goal is to start with California, and then these flowcharts can be modified to reflect regulations in other states. Next, please. This project will be starting this month and ending in February next year. The intended audience is small farmers, and formats that will be developed will include flowcharts and brochures. Next, please. Third one focuses on the aquaponics and intensive containerized hydroponics, specifically on monitoring and record-keeping training. Next, please. The specific objectives will include evaluating current literature and conducting risk assessment, developing a model food safety plan and gap for aquaponics products, strategy for monitoring record keeping, suggestions for validation and verification for select model systems, and training materials that will be used in a one-day workshop, and the workshop would be recorded and available as a webinar. Next, please. The start date is August, and completion will be in June, but some of the activities might extend beyond the length of the project. Formats will be written materials, electronic materials, as well as in-person delivery. Next, please. Fourth project focuses on the development of digital repository for food safety training photos. Next, please. The objective is to create a digital repository that will include a number of photos that have been collected over the years for food safety standards and best practices coming out of California. They will be free, and they will serve as a long-term and easily accessible sources that can be used as examples and clarification during the trainings. Next, please. The project would start in August, and the completion date is end of March for next year. The idea is to develop a repository as well as some worker training tools. Next, please. The fifth project focuses on food safety education for the cottage industry and farmers market groups. Next, please. The objectives are to identify and address the food safety risks and hazards for very small producers from the cottage industry, and including some of the basic topics on produce safety, safe food handling, labeling, permitting rules, sanitary design. And this has been proposed from our Pacific group, or group located in the Pacific subregion, to develop and create educational videos to address more complex issues, and including posters and pictographics for less complex topics. And then also to create a YouTube channel to upload the videos similar to what they have already done at the University of Hawaii's food safety website. Next, please. This project is due to start in August and completion at the end of June next year. The intended audience is cottage industry and farmers market groups, formats, video, poster, as well as potentially a field demonstration. Next, please. Sixth project is on small farm agricultural water monitoring treatment, multilingual training videos, and this was also proposed by a group from the Pacific. Next, please. The objective is to identify water treatment options in Hawaii, Guam, and American Samoa, and to develop a protocol for testing and treating agricultural water. Based on these testing and treatment protocols, they would develop a storyboard for video production, and then they would translate the story in multiple languages. They would tape audio recordings or provide audio recordings in various languages, as well as add a closed caption with the assistance from translator as needed. They plan to videotape water testing and treatment process, edit and create final videos, and upload it with Farm Food Safety, Hawaii Department of Agriculture, University of Guam, and American Samoa Community College websites. Next, please. This project will also start in August and end in June of 2018. The similar cottage industry and farmers market groups are the target audience, and it will be video, poster, and field demonstrations. Next, please. The pre-PCQI introductory seminar series, next please, is the next submitted project. The objective is to develop educational training materials for a series of short seminars that are designed to provide basic food safety knowledge in line with Fisma. And the audience, it would be simplified for the audience that may not be familiar or ready to take the PCQI training at this time. Next, please. And the format would be 2-hour courses. The overview would be available as a free webinar, and the more specific seminars will be offered through Oregon State University Food Innovation Center's Food Safety Program. The teaching materials would be developed in August and September, reviewed, and then piloted in October and May of 2018. Next, please. And this, again, intended audience is small and very small processors, and formats would be teaching slide, teaching materials for printing. Next, please. And the last project is actually a food safety plan for breadfruit flour that has been proposed from the Pacific region to develop a model food safety plan or plan for processing safe and wholesome tropical fruit products using breadfruit as an example. Next, please. Next, please. And so the start date is July, and the end is June of next year. The attended audience is farmers, food processors, entrepreneurs, and residents in the Pacific region. or anybody that may be venturing into fruit flower business. Next, please. And with that, this concludes all the add-on projects proposed in our region. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Giovanna. And I think we're going to move right into the next group, and we're going to move into the cooperative agreements now that we've covered all the regional centers. So I'd like Janie Hip, who's on the phone call right now, to talk more about the Native American tribes outreach, education, and training to enhance food safety and Fisma compliance. Janie? Janie, yep.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I unmuted you.
Okay, great. Thanks. I apologize for not having slides ready for the group. We just had 134 beginning farmers with us for 10 days, and we were training on food safety while they were with us. So we were a little bit overcome with other responsibilities. But I can make this kind of short and sweet. We are focusing on delivery of the PSA approved materials at this point in time, particularly in year one. In future years, we're going to be spending more time on some very specific optional alternative training materials that are very specific to tribes and the products that they produce specifically that would or could be covered under the Fisma rules that are out at this point. But I will tell you that in addition to doing on-the-ground trainings, in-person trainings, we are moving those throughout every region of the U.S., every Bureau of Indian Affairs region, I should say. Indian lands and the producers that produce on those lands exist in 34 states. So we are very aggressively doing in-person grower trainings in every region of Bureau of Indian Affairs regions, including Alaska. Those are going to be rolling out in a hyper intense schedule through the end of December and then on into the first part of next year. We'll simultaneously be working on alternate trainings and the content surrounding those that are very specific to tribal food products that on their face appear to be covered under the specific produce covered under the Act and under the regulations, but are unique to tribes and hold cultural and spiritual significance, and therefore are going to have a different approach in how we actually train to those issues and how those issues and those products nestle into Fisma itself. So I'm going to keep y'all posted on that. I think we should probably have at some point, Gretchen, and we're happy to work with you and the rest of all of the centers and teams to do this. I think it would be best if we actually scheduled a webinar that we could actually do a deeper dive on these unique qualities of the produce themselves, and I'll just kind of hold that out. One of the things, and we can schedule it and talk about it later. One of the webinar series that we're doing, we are doing an online webinar series that involves use of the PSA materials already. We did add 2 microbiology related subject matter webinars, mainly because most native producers have never had access to those kind of standard microbiological informational series that you might get if you were served by the normal extension service or the land-grant system. So we felt it necessary to pull in microbiology early on and give it a double dose early in our webinar series. We also felt it very important, and we just finished this particular webinar, and just for your understanding, we're trying to schedule at least 1 webinar, if not 2, every month. And we have quite a few under our belt already, and all of the webinars, as well as the recorded live presentations and the the documents themselves are all loaded on our website in a segment that is entitled Fisma Webinars. But we also felt it important to add a webinar that discussed business plan implications for Fisma compliance. Dr. H.L. Goodwin is an ag economist with about 30 some odd years experience in this space of business planning and market planning for not just Fisma related, but food safety compliance as well as environmental compliance. And many of our producers in Indian country are going to need, and we already had quite a few requests for literally walking through compliance from the standpoint of how this can be adjusted and dealt with in your actual business plan, and offering options and insights on how to make that work from an economic standpoint. So we've already done that session. And we do get, when we do our in-person trainings, we do get quite a few questions specifically on that issue. We also added a webinar that literally took the exemption issues and pulled them out from throughout Fisma itself and all the requirements, and highlighted them as its own exemption webinar, basically, and walked the producers through these issues. We got quite a few questions. We actually get quite a few questions everywhere we go about whether a particular type of producer might be exempt or not. And we felt there was sufficient misunderstanding and or confusion among our audience, and I would venture to say among most of your audiences as well, as to whether someone should seek coverage under an exemption or just go ahead and become familiar and begin compliance activities and food safety plans. Our initiative's focus is on compliance and preparing people to comply and to do proper food safety plans. So helping them to better understand the exemption frameworks is really important. The other webinars that we have added to our series that are not going to come up for a couple more months is we've added two legal issues webinars. Native producers who produce on trust land or on reservations or on tribal lands have an entirely different legal framework that they must consider and comply with. We're also receiving questions already from state departments of agriculture about how they're going to negotiate with and interface with tribal government jurisdiction in compliance and enforcement types of issues. So we really cannot wait to actually consider these issues, nor can we say that we don't have an answer. We have to do our best to lift up the issues and at least talk through what we do know of how Indian law is going to interface with this new component of food safety law. We don't offer legal advice. We literally just lift up the various issues and concerns. Every single in-person training that we have, these issues come up, and in some cases they are specific to interface with state governmental authorities in their jurisdiction, and in some cases they are unique to how tribal government authorities and jurisdictions interface with other departments outside of HHS and or FDA or USDA. So these issues can get quite complex very quickly, and so we felt it necessary to add two legal issues discussions to our webinar series. So we look forward to really following what every other region and the local foods folks are doing with all of these materials, and we'll look forward to sharing with you in the future as we continue to roll our in-person and webinar series out, and to just let you know that come year 2 of our cooperative agreement, we're going to be lifting up some very specific and very complex issues that affect only our producers, but affect our producers native producers in the context of how they interface with other producers in your regions. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Jeannie. And we will definitely plan to link to those webinar series in your website in the notes that go out with this meeting recording as well, so people have access to those. And we definitely will follow up with you all to try to put on perhaps a produce safety educators webinar as well on some of the tribal nations issues and information surrounding tribal nations foods and those kind of issues. So we look forward to that.
Thank you.
And we have one additional presentation to go over today, and that will be from Barbara Patterson, who is with the National Farmers Union and also the Local Food Producer Cooperative Agreement. And she's going to discuss more about educational resources that they've got in development. Barbara?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks so much for inviting us on the call. It's been really great to hear what everyone else is working on. I think most of you know about our cooperative agreement, but for those of you that don't, ours is national in scope, very focused on the local food producers and processors, so hitting both the produce safety rule as well as the preventive controls rule. We have partnered with a number of different entities to try and move this project forward. We had a couple of different tiers of projects, but the main partnership that's been with the project from the very beginning, the National Young Farmers Coalition, New England Farmers Union, the Washington State Department of Ag, the Deep South Food Alliance, Maryland Department of Ag, and Cornell University. We've also expanded, Farmers Union is a federation, so we've expanded to include a number of our Farmers Union divisions to carry out some of the outreach and training endeavors. Additionally, we've partnered with Moses, Florida Organic Growers, Eco Farm, and the Community Alliance of Family Farmers. So we've really tried to target the specific places and groups that are working with local foods producers and processors. There's a number, actually kind of a small number of add-on materials that we are working on creating through the project at this point that we have identified that we plan to complete, and I'll go through those, but at the forefront just wanted to say that we, like North Central, have started to, obviously they're a bit farther along than we are, quite a bit farther along, but we have started working on a needs assessment. That link to that survey is currently live. We launched that last month, trying to get a lot of input from local food producers and very small scale processors to identify where we should be spending our time in resource development. We're very interested in what the Western Center is doing for small and very small food processors. I think that will be an extremely useful tool, as we've already begun to identify that the FSPCA is just a very challenging curriculum for small and very small food processors, as I know many of you have also experienced. In the works for us now, we just signed the contract with our Wisconsin Farmers Union to conduct a podcast. There'll be a number of episodes available with the podcast, and we will definitely share that with the group when that's available. National Young Farmers Coalition will be creating a guidebook on the project, largely informed by the needs assessment, but a takeaway, something that we can present and share widely. They're also working on a number of on-farm videos. Those are still in the preliminary stages. They've done some planning with regard to those. We've created a website, localfoodsafety.org, and on there we will have a widget for calculating exemption status and some sample worksheets to paper copies of those to calculate your exemption status, adjusted for inflation and all of that, and use that as a sample record for those that are exempt and qualified exempt for that record keeping requirement. I think I will stop there. We've got a number of other things happening today, so apologies for the brevity, but we've got, I think I'll stop there and address any questions if there are any. I think we're at that point.
All right, thank you so much, Barbara. And she is correct. We would like to wrap up the session by inviting you all to ask questions first about the Western Center materials, the local foods and tribal nations educational materials. If you have any questions for that group, first, especially because it sounds like Barbara's got to get running. And then we can open it up for a larger discussion about educational materials since we do have a few minutes left. So go ahead, and if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, or the same way as earlier, feel free to use the chat box.
One thing I would just say is Shazam! Congratulations to all the presenters for staying on time. That was amazing. When I saw the number of slides, I thought, oh, this is going to be bad. But good job, you presenters. You did a great job of staying on time. And Gretchen, keeping everybody on time. That was fabulous.
The one question that did come in, I think this gets to some of the resources that Janie was talking about, was actually about the educational materials on basic microbiological concepts. They're, I think this is coming from Pennsylvania, they're specifically thinking about doing this for Spanish-speaking farm workers in Pennsylvania. So I think, Janie, can you speak to that particular resource?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
I can.
Yeah. For those two presentations, we actually used one of our HACCP experts on campus. And so his training in microbiology is pretty intense. We can, his two sections of those webinars are posted online. I can just send everybody a link or whatever. But we didn't try to do anything that was not taught by someone who actually teaches microbiology at the land-grant level. And so we did actually, in one of our trainings though, meet, and Betsy was there actually, we did meet a PhD candidate from Arizona who we're trying to pull into our work. She is actually receiving her PhD in food safety and microbiology within the next few months, and she is a Navajo speaker. And so we are trying to pull her into our work so that we can actually offer that at least in one native language, because Navajo does have so many producers, clearly. We're not looking to do that in other native languages. We just don't have the funding to do that. So the microbiology, though, we feel confident about the professor who taught it, and we're glad to share that information. But I will tell you that that a lot of producers that I've worked with over 30 years actually do need that information. It helps sell Fisma to them a little bit better, if you know what I mean.
Janie, there's another question that I think is really for you, which is, can any grower attend the native trainings that you guys are organizing?
Yes, actually they can. All they have to do is call Sandy Martini or email her, and we can. She should be on these email chains as well. They can attend. Clearly, we don't care, and they should know that they're going to might have questions that are going to be confusing to them because they are going to be very complex and related to native food production and where it's grown. But no, our trainings are open to whomever might want to attend. And I've also had a couple of, every time we've done a training, we've also had a couple of State Department of Ag people who have come, and other land-grant people who have come, who either have tribes within their jurisdictional boundaries or have interfacing with native producers in some other educational context. So they're open.
Okay, I think we have another question that's probably directed to Giovanna or someone from the Western Center, but the question is the Western Center planning on offering another project submission opportunity next year as well?
Thank you, Gretchen. I can answer that. Unfortunately, we don't have currently resources that have been set aside for add-on projects for next year. We don't know the fate of the centers, what will happen after the grant runs out, but that if we do get some opportunity for extension, we'll definitely consider that for the next round. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody have any additional questions for the Western Center, local foods, or tribal nations groups? Okay, does anybody have any questions or even just comments about educational materials or things that your group has identified that, you know, maybe you could collaborate on with either the PSA or any of the folks on this call? You know, I think everyone is very receptive to hearing about new projects, especially needs in particular regions.
Gretchen?
Yeah.
This is Janie again, and I'm sorry to kind of beat this horse, but I just kind of give everybody a heads up that there are some really complicated legal issues involved with tribal jurisdiction, and if you have tribes in your region, and we really need to do a deeper dive with this educators group on what those are so that you can. And Betsy has been in the room when we've actually parking lotted a lot of these issues, and FDA really hasn't given us clear answers or clearance to answer things a certain way. I'm really quite concerned that some of the state departments of agriculture are going to walk into a very gnarly situation and drag all of our educators into those situations. And I just think the sooner we could do some issue spotting with this educators group on some of these concerns, I think it would be a moment well served.
Absolutely. We would absolutely welcome that discussion, and I will definitely follow up with you after this call to try to get something scheduled. And, you know, for those of you who are on the call who are working with tribal nations, we would definitely invite you to that conversation because I think it would be very valuable. I agree.
And to that point, Gretchen, we've requested some notification from the other centers, whether they're working with tribes, tribal nations, and native producers, but we've gotten very little response. 2 of the centers have responded, but we really, there's a big glob of tribes that are producing produce covered by these rules in the West and in the South, and I think if we could you know, interface with you all better, it would avoid a lot of problems.
Yep, that's great feedback, and we'll try to, I mean, that's part of this whole group is to try to make those connections and understand where everyone's at and what needs, you know, are out there.
This is Angela with the North Central. I just want to mention, it's kind of off topic a little bit, but anybody out there that does need cheese, we have an outreach project in our region that is looking at cheese manufacturing up in Wisconsin. And so if anybody is looking at walkthroughs and being educated on there, they're willing to come out and help with cheese producers. And I just talked with Giovanna about in our region, Ohio State, as well as University of Arkansas are doing work more on hydroponics and aquaponics, looking at some additional add-on material development, as well as looking at group gap interfaces with Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State. So anybody in that realm looking at group gap versus Fisma, there is work being done in there. So I just want to mention those as well.
Awesome. I did get another question / comment in that I think is more for the general population of the group on this call, you know, trainers and educators. But the question is, what have folks found to be the most effective form of communication regarding the upcoming food safety guidelines in regions where the growers are very scattered or spread out? And I think that's open to anyone to comment on if you've got experience working in remote regions or where growers are, you know, kind of distributed all over the place.
Are you talking about best practices to literally get the word out? Is that what the question is?
Well, the question says most effective form of communication regarding upcoming food safety guidelines.
You know, for the native producers, we have some established communication infrastructures that exist in Indian country. If any of the other centers feel they need some assistance in that regard, we're glad to help. But I don't know whether this is in response to that question or not. And this is Janie. We're already getting requests for any information possible on animal feed. So in terms of what some of the other pieces of this puzzle that are coming down the pike, we're already seeing a high degree of interest in some of those areas, and there's just not curriculum ready that I know of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I can speak from my experience in working with a lot of the Northeast growers too in this particular question. I think, for growers who are scattered across the state or scattered across the region, a lot of our approach in getting this material out there to them has been to attend the grower meeting. So in the wintertime, we show up at our annual grower meeting and at least give, kind of get your feet wet with Fisma talk and give an introduction so people are at least aware that Fisma exists and what resources might be available to them. And then, the hope is that the following year or even that, following season, we can schedule some trainings because there's been interest just in doing a couple quick talks. One of the resources that I highlighted in the Produce Safety Alliance materials that we often use is the Fisma exemption and exclusions talk, because that at least gives the growers a benchmark of, do I need to be worried about this, or can I sweep it under the rug for a little while until my buyers come after me? But that's a good talk to at least get that information out there and get them, to understand whether they need to look into the produce safety rule or not. Betsy, I don't know if you have any additional comments.
I mean, so there's a couple of different ways to look at this. One is that because Fisma impacts the industry as a whole, I think it's important that all growers understand, even growers that aren't subject to it. And as Janie has pointed out, different growers have different relationships to the regulation, tribal nations having a specifically special sort of relationship. But, and as we talked about earlier, I really think reaching growers comes to this continuum, because we have new growers that are just coming into it. We have growers that have been doing it for a while but have not wanted to engage in food safety. So I think everything that's been said is true. I think the key is knowing who the growers are you're working with, and where do they get their information? How do they interface with information? I know the Local Foods Project has this survey out, and that's trying to discern. There's some questions in there to discern how people have this relationship with information. And as always, I think my perspective is meet the growers where they're at. And part of doing that is knowing where they're at. So grower meetings are certainly it. The other day I got a chance to go on a farm tour, not as a presenter, but more as a guest. And I went along, and it gives you a good chance to talk to growers in an informal way to find out, how people are feeling about things. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think it's kind of a bigger, messier question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Betsy, this is Janie again. I will second and third that comment, and that's why we added our exemption webinar, because we were hearing crazy talk, literally, of people just choosing to totally ignore these and stick their head in the sands when they were clearly covered by them. And I just don't think we do anybody any favors by walking them away from having market access. But they don't understand the exemption issues, I don't think.
Right. And Janie, you just added the piece that I did not mention, but that is critical, which is that I mentioned about Fisma, but the key point you just said is market access. And the thing is that, as I like to remind people, you know, growers are growing a product, and they got to get it into the market, and they got to sell it. Otherwise, they're not farmers. And Fisma's part of that, and food safety is should be part of every grower's approach. But there's a lot of things they're juggling out there, and trying to get the information to them in a way that's useful and productive, I think is always the struggle.
Okay, looking at the clock, I think it's about time to wrap up. If there are no other questions, or if you do have some questions, feel free to email Betsy or I after the call. And we will be sending out all of these slides as well as some notes with the resources that were discussed today on the call, so that you'll have those to refer to. But I would really, really like to thank all of our presenters today. This was kind of sprung on them on sort of a last minute notice, but it was an identified need that we really needed to get everyone on the same page in terms of what materials were developed. So thank you all to the regional centers and the cooperative agreement folks for coming on and sharing all of your resources. We really appreciate it.
And for staying on time. You guys rock.
Yep, yeah, that's definitely a perk too. So before we leave, our next tentative meeting, we're going to try for August 29th at 2 p.m. Right now, we don't have an agenda, but I might be following up with Jamie to see if maybe we can schedule a tribal nations specific meeting at that time. If not, feel free to send me other topics, because these meetings, we really host them for you all to discuss some of the challenges in your regions and you know, things at a national level. So don't hesitate to email me with any suggestions you have. We will send out more information closer to the time of that meeting with a login and all of the details that you need. But again, thank you all for joining the call. We hope this has been useful. It's been extremely useful for me just to know what's going on out there. So again, thank you all to the presenters and for everyone who joined today. And have a good rest of the week.